Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today we're doing a very exciting tutorial. We are basically going to create this middle section of my long sleeve top, which if you want to make the whole top, I do have a pattern for this on my channel, but today we're just going to be doing just this middle part. The main point of it is that it's single crochets and there's no tie or anything to hold it together. It's just stretchy stitches that hold it up. It's honestly a very simple pattern, but I still wanted to do a tutorial for it because in my other video I just kind of brushed over this section because it was a pattern and not a full tutorial. So let's get right into it. And just a quick reminder that for this video and my next couple of videos, I'm going to be voicing over. So if anything doesn't perfectly line up with what I'm doing in the moment, that is why. Starting off with our materials, we have weight for acrylic yarn. You can use any weight for yarn. I have scissors, a darning needle, and a 4.25mm hook. You can definitely use two different colors of yarn like I did if you want to do this middle patch here, but I'm just going to be using one color for the base of this one simply because I don't have a color that perfectly goes with this yarn. And also I did decide halfway through making this top that I also wanted to add some surface crochet onto it. So in my opinion, it's best to have a second color of yarn if you're doing surface crochet, but if you would like to do it the same color, that's fine as well, but just make sure you're accounting for having a little bit of extra yarn in order to make whatever pattern you're going to do with your surface crocheting. And as we start our first row, the most important thing, that is the only way that this pattern works, is that you do not crochet all the way around the whole top with your single crochets, because you need to leave room for the stretchy stitches in the back, which is what allows it to stay on, because if you go too close on the back, you're not going to have enough room for stretchy stitches and it's not going to be able to stay on. So I'll put a video on the screen of what it looks like on my back to show how far wide I do it. And honestly, you could go a little bit closer, but I'm just trying to be as safe as possible and not risk anything and just do all these stretchy stitches so that it will 100% stay on and fit. So starting off our first row, we're making a slip knot. And then we're going to make a row of foundation single crochets. So you could technically do chains and go into them with single crochets, but the only thing that I would be careful of with doing that is that you are going to have a chain edge on either the top or the bottom of the tube top, and you also are going to have a different amount of stretchiness in your chains versus the stitches. So I just feel like it is a little bit easier to do foundation stitches, but if you're more comfortable with chains, feel free to do that instead. So to start off, we're going to chain 2. Go into the side 2 loops of my first chain, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 1, and then yarn over, pull through 2. And then I kind of like to tighten up the edge right there. And now we're going to do our next one. So going to the side 2 loops, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 1, yarn over, pull through 2. And so we're going to keep doing these foundation single crochets until it reaches, again, not all the way across, but pretty much to that point in your back where you're willing to allow the stretchy section to start. So as you can see, mine are just past my armpit, so all the way across the front and past my armpit. I would honestly suggest that you do your stretchy section as big as possible, but if you want to risk it a little bit, you can make this first row longer and do a smaller stretchy section, but I would just be cautious about it because you do really want it to fit, and this is not a top you want to take apart because it's a lot of single crochets. The only thing about doing the stretchy section and not doing a back tie is that there's not really any room for adjustability after. When you make a top with ties, you could make it fit wider, you could make it fit closer just by adjusting the ties, but when it's like this, it's kind of set where it is. There is the flexibility of the stretchiness, but I do feel like most people would end up making it too wide rather than too small. And again, with this pattern, you can't make it any smaller. You really can only just make it wider from the stretchiness it's capable of doing. So again, just continuing with these foundation single crochets for the rest of the row. I just finished my first row, but again, for the sizing of this, I would say that the higher your bust size, the less stretchy section that you need for the back. So you basically want this length here when stretched to be able to cover the widest spot that the top is going to be covering. Otherwise, the stretchy section is going to start overlapping onto the front if this does not cover the widest part of your front. So when you're measuring this, measure this at the top as well, just like where you want the top of the tube top to fit, but also measure at the widest part of wherever that is in how long you're going to make this top, so that you know that that is the length that you're going to make this row. You want it to cover that widest point completely. So technically you might end up still having like a large amount of stretchy section on your back, which is perfectly fine and honestly preferable, but if you do not check that this covers the widest part of your front section, it's going to end up fitting kind of weird because those stretchy sections are going to overlap onto the front, and it definitely does look like those stitches are supposed to be in the back. Okay, so starting our next row, we're going to chain 1, turn our work, and then we are going to do single crochets in every stitch starting from the first one. So for this pattern, I'm going to start in the first stitch and not crochet into the chain at the end of the row. A lot of the times I'll skip the first stitch and go into the chain, but because for this top we have the stretchy section in the back, that's kind of going to cover up our somewhat messy edges here where the turning chains are. The one thing I will say is you should check the stretchiness after that first row, but then also after you finish this row. So if you started with chains, you're going to check when you finish the chains, when you single crochet into them, and then once you do your second single crochet row into them. If you're doing foundation single crochets, you're going to check after your foundation single crochet row and after you've done a row of single crochets into those foundation single crochets. Just because sometimes that next row is going to kind of determine how much stretchiness there is, because foundation single crochets and chains are a tiny bit different of stretchiness than a row of just like normal single crochets. So again, here I'm going up to the last stitch, but I'm not crocheting into the chain. And if you want to, you can count how many stitches you have to make sure it's the same every row, but I'm not really going to do that because I don't tend to have a habit of skipping stitches. But if you do have that habit, or if you're more of a beginner, I would recommend counting your stitches at least for your first few rows so it doesn't end up being uneven, because you want this to be like a perfect length, same length every single row of this section. And you're going to repeat these rows until it reaches the length down that you want it to be. So you can make this like a crop tube top, you can make it all the way down to be full coverage. It just depends on literally whatever you want it to be. It will work for any of them, but again, make sure that you measure one more time now that you've finished this row, that it fits on the widest point of your front section and covers it completely. So that means it should be going like at least partially over your side, even maybe around a little bit to your back at that widest point. At the less wide points, it's going to go to the back, but in the most wide points, it should at least go to your side if it can't go to your back. And I'm going to stick with you for one more row, and then I will come back once I've finished these single crochet front rows, and then I will show you how to do the stretchy section in the back. If you're wanting to do a panel like this in the middle, I did 5 rows of the lighter gray color, and basically what I did is I did my dark gray color rows for however many that is, and then I chained 1 and cut off my work at the end of when I wanted to switch to the light gray color. Then I just tied on my new yarn and did those 5 rows. At the end of those 5 rows with my light gray, I chained 1 and cut off my work, and then tied on the dark gray color and finished the rest of the top with that. But either way, I was just doing single crochets with all of them. This just allows you to have a different color, so you could literally make this striped. You could make it be every couple of rows is one color, every couple of rows is the next color, every row is a different color, just whatever you want it to be. Just do remember that if you are doing surface crochet, you want to pick colors that will match with your surface crochet. So if you're going to do 10 different colors for your base, make sure you still have another color for the surface crocheting that you want. But if you're not doing the surface crocheting, choose any color in the world. It won't matter because you won't have that surface crochet step that might make a difference. So starting my next row, again, this is how you're going to be starting every single row in this section, chaining 1 and turning your work, and then starting your single crochets from the first stitch all the way down through the rest of the row. And I would say there are times where like you don't want to have a very tight tension or very tight stitches, but here you definitely can, because the tighter your stitches, the less wide your gaps are going to be in between stitches. Gaps between stitches are very natural because the stitches can't completely overlap, but depending on whether you want to wear something underneath the tube top or whether you don't care, then you can kind of just like do your stitches normally. But if you definitely want it to be like you can just wear the tube top on its own and nothing showing through, you can definitely do a little bit tighter of stitches. Okay, so going into my last stitch, and not going into my chain. And again, for every single row after this, we're going to single crochet into every single stitch, but not into the chain. And you're doing this rows for as long as you want it to be. So you're just going to like hold it up to yourself, see if it's as far down as you want it to be. If not, you're going to add more rows. And I would attempt to like hold it the way that it would actually lay. So if it reaches a little bit past your armpits, you're going to try and like tuck it under each armpit and see how far down it's reaching so that you can measure it properly. Alright, so I will come back to you once I'm finished with these single crochet front rows. Okay, so I just finished working on my front section, and so now what we have to do is start working on the back. So what we're going to do is take from this last corner that we have and just turn it completely to the side like this. Then we're going to put our hook right into that spot and we're going to chain one. But now what we're going to be doing is working down this side, so like the edges of your rows. So we're going to be putting stitches into the sides of our single crochet rows. If you would like to, you can count how many rows you did and then match that number exactly with how many single crochets you do in this row that I'm starting right here. If you don't really want to count, that's completely fine. I didn't count. You can just try and basically fit one single crochet per row, but if it's not exact, that's fine. You just want it to be pretty close, and you don't really have to go through one loop or go through two loop. Just pretty much try and go through two loop because then it's a little bit more secure of a spot. But again, since this is the side, you're not going to be going through like two easy loops. You're going to be going just like underneath a couple loops that are just like at the side of the row. So it's going to be like basically through like a chain and maybe like the side of the single crochet to make those two loops. If you only go through one loop, that is technically fine. However, you're probably going to be only going through your outermost loop, which is going to be your turning chain, and one loop from your turning chain is not the most secure spot, so I wouldn't want it to stretch out because you went into a spot that wasn't that secure. So again, just try to go a little bit further down. Okay, and then as you're working your way towards the corner, still doing those single crochets into each stitch all the way down to the corner, making one exactly into that corner as well. Now what we're going to do, and this is what we're going to be doing for as long as these rows are going to be, is chain one and turn your work. And then we're going to be working into our back loops only. So basically we have two loops here. We have our front loop here and our back loop here. So when you're crocheting into your back loops only, what we do is we go right between them, pick up that back one on our hook, and make our single crochet. Right between, out the back, make a single crochet. And repeating this all the way down this row that we just created. And now it will be way easier to make this row because even though we're going sideways, you have a foundation row here. So now you're just going into simple loops. You're not having to go into the sides of a row. Make sure you are going only into the back loop though. That is what creates the stretchiness. If you do not go through only the back loop, it is not going to be stretchy and it's not going to create the effect that this top is supposed to make. And so basically every single row in this section is going to be the exact same. You're chaining one at the beginning and single crocheting into the back loops of every single stitch in these rows. So very similar to what we were doing in our front section. However, now we're going into our back loops only. That is our only difference. Otherwise, we're still doing our chain ones. We're still going into every single stitch. Making our way all the way to the corner with our back loop single crochets. And then chaining one, and we would start our next row of those back loop single crochets. So the one very important thing that is a little bit hard to do is to make sure that you do not do too many of these rows, because basically these rows are our stretchy section. So it makes it what allows you to not have to tie this top closed. But if you're not careful, you might end up making it too wide and then it won't stay up. If you do end up making it too wide and you've already stitched it completely closed and so you don't want to take anything apart, you could always add slip stitches with elastic thread along the inside and that will kind of like cinch it up. You can look up a tutorial for that because I'm not going to show that in here, but the purpose of this top is to not have to do that extra step, so you do want to make sure you're measuring. So you have two options. You can either use a tape measure and measure around pretty much like the widest point that the top has, but the only thing again is that in different spots of the top it's not going to need to be as wide, and then in another spot it is going to need to be wider. So in my opinion, measuring isn't always the best way because you don't have the same measurement every single spot in where the top is going to fit. But if you do want to do that, what you're going to be doing is adding these stretchy rows, and then you're going to measure up with your tape measure onto the top, and not just when it's flat like this, but you need to stretch it, because for example where I have 4 inches here, then when I stretch it, 4 inches is in a completely different spot than it was when I was not stretching it. So if you measure it without stretching it, then you're going to end up making it the complete wrong size. If you measure it with stretching, it will be closer to fitting actually where you need it to be. But basically, when you're measuring how it's fitting, you want to measure off across the entire panel, not just in one spot, because you're trying to reach close to the widest point around that you've measured where your top is going to fit on you. So you're trying to closely match that number that you measured on your body with how wide the top is as you're adding those stretchy rows. So like you can check after every single stretchy row, you can check after every few, but you would just be measuring back and forth, checking that it's getting close to that number. But again, you want to be a little bit less than it. You don't want to be exactly at that number. You need a little bit of extra space to be able to do your last row, because again, it's easy to make it too wide rather than too small. Otherwise, what I normally do is I just hold this up to myself, like putting this in the front and holding this around the back with the stretchy section and just stretching to see if it's almost reaching here. So I just kind of like grab that stretchy section and pull it around to try and reach to the other edge, which will be on like my other side of my back. And once it's getting close to that, I'm gonna stop, because pretty much if you're close enough, it will stretch to fit you. It might be a little bit tight when you're wearing it, but it's honestly a little bit better for it to be a little bit tight and be staying on than for it to be too loose and not stay on. So it is a little bit difficult because like the way that I make these tops is very like much off of feel, and I'm like holding up to myself. I freehanded a decent amount of stuff, so I'm like used to having to check how far over it's going to be. But definitely if you're not as experienced in that, feel free to use the measuring tape. I just don't opt for that because I feel like sometimes it's easier for myself to see it on my body and see if it's fitting properly. But honestly, if you stitch it together on your last row after this, when you're like stitching it closed and you try it on and it's too wide, you can just take off a couple of those stretchy rows and then re-stitch it closed, and then it should fit you. So you technically have that option of having to take it apart if you need to, but it is a little bit nicer to be able to not have to undo that part. But this is a spot where like you'd only be undoing a couple rows, so it wouldn't make too much of a difference. And again, also if you're trying to fit it on after you've closed it up and it doesn't fit, then you can add a couple more rows. So you do have that adjustability. It's not the type of top where like you'd have to be undoing so much work. You'd just be undoing like 2 or 3 rows of single crochets. So again, continue these single crochets in the back loop, measuring whichever of those options that you would like to try to get it to be very close to being closed. But again, you need that extra space to be able to stitch it completely closed. So now I am back. I just finished my stretchy rows, and if you can see at the end here, it's like stretched out. I probably added a couple extra stitches accidentally, and I also was like holding it and stretching it out as I'm holding it up, but it doesn't really make a difference when you're wearing it, to be honest. But again, to avoid that, you could just like count your stitches. I just like never count my stitches unless I really have to, and I'm not selling this top, so I'm like not that particular about it. If I was selling it, I would care more and put more effort in. But yeah, so now you have 2 options. You have the optional first step of adding your surface crocheting with whatever pattern you would like to make. But if you would not like to do surface crocheting and you would just like to stitch it closed, you can skip to this timestamp. If you are doing surface crocheting, you're going to leave your end there in the corner at the edge of your stretchy rows. You're just going to leave that ball of yarn connected because we don't want to have to tie it back on after to like add just your last row. We want it to be a flat panel right now when we're adding our surface crochet rows, just so that you don't accidentally stitch together like through both panels. You're only going through one side. So now you need to decide which side is your inside. So I'm going to have this side as my outside and this side is my inside. So on your inside, you are going to find a spot, tuck your hook through pretty much like on a stitch at whatever first corner you want it to start, and tie on your yarn. And I'm going to do a double knot. So then what you're going to do is you're going to go on the outside of your top, and you're going to find that spot, which should be pretty obvious because you have a little knot there. You're going to tuck your hook through, grab onto your yarn, not the short end, but the long one that's connected to the ball of yarn, and pull through. And then you're just gonna start pretty much making slip stitches. I'll show you from the top and then I'll show you from the bottom in a bit, but you're basically just tucking your hook through and making slip stitches in whatever pattern you want it to be. So just like angle your hook where you want your next stitch to be so you can make whatever pattern that is going to be. I initially wanted to make like waves, but then I didn't really like how they looked, so I just left it as swirls. So from the back, what I'm doing is I'm sticking my hook through the front like this. From the back, I'm hooking onto the yarn and pulling it through to the front section. And now I'm going to go back to the beginning and start where I actually need to be, because I was just kind of doing example stitches and I wasn't like perfectly doing my pattern. And what I like to do is from the bottom, I'm holding my yarn exactly like I would when I'm normally crocheting, just so that I know that I'm crocheting into the correct yarn and not into that like 1-inch end, because every once in a while I will accidentally hook onto that one and then I have to take it apart and find the right end again. So by holding onto it, it's a little bit easier because I can feel when it's like hooking onto the yarn that's connected to my hand, if that makes any sense. And if you make mistakes, it's the same process of taking apart normal stitches. So from the back side, you're just pulling the end and it'll take apart whatever stitch that you made your mistake, and then you can just go back, hook your yarn back through, and fix whatever stitch that you wanted to fix. So I'm just going to keep making these stitches, and as you get used to it, you are going to get a little bit faster. It is a slow process when you are first starting, because it's kind of like very different than crocheting in my opinion, because it's like not going into a row, you're going into the surface, but you will get used to it eventually, I promise. And then once you get to the end, you're just going to do one extra, pull it a little bit further through, and then you're just going to pull some extra end through and cut it off. And then you're going to pull through with your hook. Then what you're going to do is go into the other side of the top, go to the edge of where you can see that your stitch is stopped, and hook the yarn on and pull it through so it's back on the inside of the top. If you have any other extra yarn still sticking through here, you can pull that out because you don't need it anymore. And then you're going to put your hook through a stitch right here and make another knot, because I love to be extra secure and make sure my stitches are staying exactly where I want them. You probably don't need to tie it this many times, but I like to because it has never undone itself and I like to keep it that way. Okay, so I finished the pattern that I'm going to do. I ended up doing the swirls again. I wasn't really going to do those waves. And so now we are ready to stitch it together. And again, if you didn't do the surface crochet, here's where you're joining me back and just immediately stitching it together because you're not doing the surface crocheting. And so I'm just going to stretch out my top a little bit here to match where I had my little bit of extra stretchiness in my stretchy rows, but it'll definitely still fit. It just is a little bit of a minor mistake. So what you're going to do is put your hook back in this corner. If you did end up taking it out, you're going to chain one, and you're going to line up these two edges. What you're going to do is you're going to be doing a single crochet through both panels, and we're going to be trying to keep it lined up all the way down so you don't end up having extra space on either of the panels. You're going to go through both loops in the front and then just kind of like shove it through the back and make a single crochet. Here is where again you want to be doing basically one single crochet from the front, lining up with one row of the back, but again, it's not going to be very exact because it's not like a clear spot like it would be as if like you were stitching the edge of two granny squares together where it's like a very clean edge. So if you're a little bit off, it doesn't matter. Just make sure that you are checking as you're going that like the edge of the top on the very bottom of the corner that you haven't reached yet, that they're not ending up like not being lined up anymore. So as you're going, you want them to stay pretty much like exactly lined up next to each other for the entire thing as you're crocheting down this row. Into the front, into the back, and single crochet, and you're just going to be repeating this all the way down. And here as well, you want to be going a little bit further down on the side where you're just going into the edge of the row. You're not trying to just go into one loop, you want to be going in at least two, maybe three, because again, you don't want it to like stretch out that extra loop like I was talking about earlier. So you're just going to repeat that down this entire row, going into the last one in the corner, making your last single crochet, and then chaining one, and you can cut it off. And so now, because we don't have any back ties, we are completely done. All we have left is weaving in our ends. So I normally don't weave in my ends with surface crocheting because it's on the inside of the top, but feel free to if you would like to. But I personally am just going to be weaving in my green ends. I'm going to leave my gray ends since they're on the inside of the top. So what we're gonna do is grab our end. So I'm gonna lay the yarn over my needle, pinch it, pull it off, and then wiggle it through the eye, threading my darning needle. And then I'm just going to take my end and I'm going to kind of direct it towards the inside of my top. So you can see I can have it like folded away from it myself right now, so that I'm going towards the inside. So basically I'm just making sure that the seam is on like the inside of the top, so that this kind of gives you like a little bit of allowance if your ends ever slightly come out. It's not on the outside, it's on the inside, and so it won't make too much of a difference. And then what we're going to be doing is just weaving through the stitches, and then once you reach the end of your end, you can cut it off. And then again, because I'm ignoring my inside ends, I'm just going to do my second end, and then I'm going to be completely done weaving the ends for this top, which is awesome. And so again, I'm just directing it towards the inside, weaving it in, and then cutting it off, and we are done. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, make sure to let me know down below and I will do my best to help. Make sure to check out my Depop for crochet stuff that I'm selling. Not this top, unfortunately, but I have tons of other stuff on there. If you have any videos you would like to see, make sure to let me know down below and I probably will make them. And if you make one of these, please make sure to tag me. If you post it, I would love to see it. And thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time. Bye! Section you need, the less stretchy section you need. With some extra space.